Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We are ready to begin. Today's webinar is eligible for one contact hour. Sigma Theta Tau International Honor Society of Nursing is accredited as a provider of nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurses Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation. The speakers and planning committee members have disclosed no relevant financial relationships. To receive contact hours for this nursing continuing professional development session, the participants are required to attend the webinar and log into our LMS to complete an evaluation form. Information on how to access this will be emailed to all attendees approximately 1 week after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available via the Sigma repository within a few business days of recording. Following the presentation, we will have time for a question and answer session. You'll see on your GoToWebinar control panel that you can send a message through the questions feature. This is where you can type in any question you'd like to pose to the presenters. Be sure to hit send so that the message makes it to us. We'd like to thank our speaker today for sharing her expertise. Our speaker today is Ashley Singh. Ashley is an assistant professor of nursing at Chatham University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Ashley's scholarly agenda focuses on leadership development, and she has engaged in a number of innovative leadership projects and studies to contribute to this area of research. Now let's go ahead and get started with today's presentation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you, Linda, for that introduction. As mentioned, I'm Ashley Singh, and I'm very happy to be here with you all today. I'm hopeful you will take away some valuable food for thought at conclusion of the webinar. So before we get things kicked off, I just want to briefly review our learning outcomes. As you can see, the first, I hope at the end of this webinar, you'll be able to understand positive psychology, define psychological capital, recognize the benefits of psychological capital across various settings, and lastly, determine whether investment in psychological capital would be an appropriate approach to professional and leadership development for either you or your staff. Also, you will notice that I provide direct quotations and definitions rather than paraphrased ones when describing the concepts and constructs within psychological capital. It was important to do this because these exact definitions are what led to the development of the construct within psychological capital. There it goes. Okay, sorry about that, little delay. So while the webinar is on psychological capital, of course, it's critical to understand the background and history of origin. So historically, psychology focused very heavily on dysfunctional behaviors and mental illness, and very little attention was paid to those positive, healthy individuals, and exploration was limited on how the positivity of these individuals influenced their professional growth and their self-actualization. So Dr. Martin Seligman, who was a very renowned psychologist, posed a new call during his American Psychological Association presidential address of 1998. He called to halt research on the negative and really called to research the healthy, happy, and human potential of individuals, a call which he deemed positive psychology. After this address, positive psychology really began to evolve and flourish. This call for positive psychology within the field ignited fierce interest among scholars and practitioners, which of course led to an exponential increase in research on this topic. This in turn inspired research in the fields of management and organizational behavior. It was really here in the management and organizational behavior literature that really applied the aspects of positive psychology to the workplace. So this development of positive psychology in the workplace was a completely new concept for most organizations, especially in the early 2000s. Because traditionally, and we even see this still now, organizations tend to focus on negative factors. Some really common ones are burnout, dissatisfaction, ineffective leadership behaviors, unjust cultures, incivility, and so forth. The hyper focus on these negative factors, of course, resulted in a lack of research on positive things, such as investment in high performers, what constitutes superior performance, how does that impact workplace outcomes, how do successful leaders and employees manage transitions and create sustainable environments for strategic change. This was just to name a few. So, organizational behavior scholars continued their exploration. I'm sorry, this is really paused on the advancement. Let me try. Can you advance that for me? Okay, right there is good. Sorry about that. My thing is not working. So positive organizational scholarship, an umbrella term, so to say, that really integrates several general positive approaches, which include states, traits, processes, perspectives, dynamics, anything as it relates to outcomes. Positive organizational scholarship was defined as a movement in organizational science that focuses on the dynamics leading to exceptional individual and organizational performance, such as developing human strength, producing resilience and restoration, and fostering vitality, as noted by Cameron and Kaza. Positive organizational scholarship has made many contributions to the sciences, and these contributions really helped structure a more specific concept: positive organizational behavior, and later, psychological capital. Can you advance, please? Thank you. Positive organizational behavior, then, can be defined as the study and application of positively oriented human resource strengths and psychological capacities that can be measured, developed, and effectively managed for performance improvement. So according to this definition put forth by Luthans, for something to be considered a psychological capacity, it must be developable and it must be related to a performance outcome. Soon, it became well supported in literature that these positive psychological capacities, as found in the literature as to be hope, efficacy, resiliency, and optimism, really became driving factors for competitive markets in business, medicine, and even in academia. Moreover, the organizational studies literature really began to support the notion that average performers could impede innovation and organizational growth. And really, a new approach was needed to yield financial stability and profitability in a complex and ever-evolving markets. So this shift really resulted in psychological capital. You can advance. So psychological capital is considered a higher order construct, meaning it's greater than the sum of its parts. So as posed by Luthans, who's really the founding father of psychological capital, it is an individual's positive psychological state of development that is characterized by having confidence, which is self-efficacy, to take on and put in necessary effort to succeed at challenging tasks, making a positive attribution, which is optimism, about succeeding now and in the future, persevering towards goals, and when necessary, redirecting paths to these goals, hope, in order to succeed. And when beset by problems and adversity, sustaining and bouncing back even beyond, which is our resiliency, to attain success. So these constructs, when combined, are also known as hero or even hero within in some literature. Importantly, the definition that you see here on this slide establishes a very clear distinction between other sources of capital that we're familiar with, such as economic capital. The what do we have in terms of our finances? Our human capital, the what we know, our skills, abilities, education, and previous experiences, and even social capital, the who we know, what relationships we have, our social networks. Rather, this really emphasizes the who we are and who we can become, because everything in here is developable. This is a critical concept to understand because, as we already discussed in the previous slides, markets and organizations are changing rapidly. And part of these changes mean that an individual's human capital, something that might be valuable today, might not be valuable in our organization tomorrow. And the same holds true for the social capital. While our social networks might be important for where we are right now, that could change. Capitals are moving targets. But what we do need is a robust set of internal resources like those found in psychological capital to be used as an augmentation to our other capitals. Together, this can promote growth and optimization of all of the capitals and really optimizing organization success and individual success too. And I think it's important to note here that PsyCap, psychological capital, is not the same as positive thinking, which is basically the practice of focusing on the good of any situation. Psychological capital really goes beyond that. And another thing that PsyCap is not, it is not the same as psychological empowerment. Psychological empowerment looks at a different set of competencies in relation to one's work. This is different. It goes beyond that. It dives a little bit deeper. Next slide. So as we had talked about those 4 criterion within the positive organizational behaviors that developed PsyCap, it's very important to understand each of these individually and the definition to which identified them. So first up, we have hope. Hope here is defined as one's willpower and determination to motivate the search for new pathways, while creativity, innovation, and resourcefulness involved in developing pathways ignites one's energy and sense of control and results in a positive spin of hope. So Luthans here really derived this definition of hope based off Rick Snyder's theory of hope, which is in the mid-90s, and it was based off the notion of one's willpower and one's way power. So willpower is your ability to establish what you want, and way power is the ability to create pathways or routes to get to what you want. Very important. Next slide, please. Efficacy then is based on Bandura's social cognitive theory. As we can remember from nursing school and way back when, it contains 5 very specific cognitive processes that are foundational to PsyCap efficacy. These 5 processes include symbolizing, forethought, observation, self-regulation, and most importantly, self-reflection. I just briefly want to highlight some of these to kind of create a bigger picture. Symbolizing refers to one's ability to create a mental image and develop a decision based off that image, a big picture, so to say. Forethought then allows one to plan for both actions and consequences based off previous experiences. Observation derives from observing behaviors or responses that yielded a positive response. This could have been from colleagues, management, family, school interactions, peers, anything. Self-regulation then requires one to set high standards and specific goals to achieve a desired performance. And lastly, self-reflection, which arguably is the most critical piece to self-efficacy, requires one to look back on previous actions, successes, and failures. I highlight and emphasize actions because a lot of people engage in self-reflection and really only look at the success and failure of the situation, but not so much the steps that led to the result. So during this self-reflection piece, individuals are really extracting the situations and actions that can be modified for future use. And importantly, the self-reflection will ultimately enhance one's self-awareness, which will lead to an improvement in self-development, which is really critical in times of turbulence and stress, which we are seeing now. Next slide. Resiliency, then, as many of you probably know, has several definitions. It's very robust in the literature, but the definition utilized for here is based on the positive organizational literature and can be defined as the capacity to rebound or bounce back from adversity, conflict, failure, or even from positive events. More specifically, I think this definition supports the use of adversity as a launching pad for personal growth and self-development. And we'll get into that a little bit more in just a few more slides. But understanding one's resiliency in terms of the workplace really enables individuals to identify environmental conditions that can really facilitate your resiliency. And this can be done through assessments, trainings, or even prompting your own self-development initiatives to build your resiliency. Next slide, please. Lastly, we come to the last construct within PsyCap, and that's optimism. Optimism here is viewed from a global tendency, meaning one can form positive expectations about life in general. Optimism is also considered an explanatory or attributional style, which is a style that enables one to attribute positively experienced events to personal, permanent, and pervasive causes. So the fundamental process here is really identified through a self-assessment of something called the response outcome independence. So the response outcome independence is when an individual feels completely in control and there is a feeling of immunization against any feelings of pessimism around them. Really, the rose-colored glasses people, right? They're so confident in their control and their vision that everything around them seems obsolete. And this truly enables people to fight for a future that they wish to see and experience. And it really helps staff or other people see the positivity that eludes from these constructs. Next slide, please. So now that we kind of provided an overview of what each of those constructs are, it brings us to our next topic. Why is it important? Well, you can see here I have some bulleted points on the slide. It's good for well-being, promotes empowerment, reduces psychological distress, namely anxiety and depression. And the constructs that really reduce those the most are optimism and hope. It enhances performance. It improves satisfaction. And literature also supports that it increases productivity. Additionally, individuals with higher psychological capital have also been linked to experiencing lower levels of employee cynicism, lower levels of absenteeism, and higher organizational citizenship behaviors. So organizational citizenship behaviors really occur when an individual welcomes tasks and responsibilities outside of their contractual obligation. These activities, in turn, will support either the individual or the organization on a macro level. Either way, it really displays positive results. And those with higher PsyCap also tend to produce a workforce that is higher performing, strong, healthy, and very well connected. Characteristics of a workforce that can be applied across all disciplines. And if we stop and reflect on healthcare at a time like this, we need a high-performing, well-connected workforce. Staff is struggling, morale is low, well-being is hard to find, and we need really to help our staff and others build robust resources so they can capitalize on these factors that will build a stronger connected workforce and work slowly towards improving well-being, morale, and empowerment will slowly build up. The psychological capital helps people tap into their adaptive coping skills, which is really, really critical in times of crisis. Next slide, please. So the big question. So why is PsyCap important to nursing? Well, we as nurses, as we all know, hold a very critical role. We have a multi-dimensional role. It's continually evolving. More things keep getting added to our plates. We're serving as educators, change agents, leaders, mentors, scholarship coaches, chairs of governance councils, and the list goes on. We often need to extend our bandwidth to meet these continuous challenges of our profession, irrespective of the setting. It could be ICU nursing, it could be, outpatient, academia, administration. It doesn't matter. We all share the same stresses of the profession as a whole. So, as we continue to manage these increasing demands, we really need to have a set of robust internal resources to help us be successful. We need these resources to help foster the incoming generation of nurses. We need these resources to build a stronger workforce as to meet the calls put out from the NLN to build a stronger workforce. We need these resources for our own leadership capabilities. And we can do this through self-reflection and self-development, just like we talked about a few slides earlier. Importantly, psychological capital is also associated with authentic leadership style. I'm sure you're familiar with that, but this was really first supported by the American Association of Critical Care Nurses in its landmark paper, Standards for Creating and Sustaining Healthy Work Environments in 2016. This landmark study posed 6 standards to building a healthy work environment, and authentic leadership was established as standard 6, and it clearly stated, nurse leaders must fully embrace the imperative of a healthy work environment. They need to authentically live it and engage others in its achievements. Authentic leadership's positive effects expand well beyond individual satisfaction and trickle into patient safety, clinical outcomes, recruitment, retention, and that's across the nursing disciplines. And importantly, also within that AACN paper, some of the critical elements highlighted under that authentic leadership element was nurse leaders need to ensure the design of systems necessary to effectively implement and sustain standards for healthy work environments. So if you think about that, irrespective of your position, we're leading. If we're influencing or helping those around us, we're leading. We're leading by example. If we're in a more formal leadership role, we have a little bit more clout and we can make some real change as well. But that's not easy. You have to fight for that. And think about how the environments are right now. We had just talked about, the pandemic lowering morale and shortages of nursing staff and faculty. It's everywhere. It's across businesses. It's across multiple settings. We need to work together to put a system in place for these working to enhance these environments. And if psychological capital is one way to do that through enhancing adaptive coping strategies and enhancing self-development initiatives, perhaps it's something we should be investigating and advocating at a higher level. And one of the other critical elements noted in the standard was the healthcare organization should facilitate efforts of nurse leaders to create and sustain healthy work environments by providing necessary time and financial human resources. So we as leaders can help others either through relieving a peer for a lunch break or looking at staffing and figuring out a way if we can use resource polls or even adjunct faculty if you're in the academic setting, to think about ways we could provide relief somewhere for individuals to be able to carve out some time for self-development. Okay, so we need to give them the time. And what about providing financial compensation for that? Well, we might not be able to pay them off clock to go somewhere. If we can work that into their work time or even discuss with human resource management, if there's any internal development initiatives that work to build these kind of resources or would be helpful for a healthy work environment, we should really be exploring some of these. So that list is not exhaustive, but those are some of the really important ones I thought were worth highlighting. And also, if you're familiar with authentic leadership, It's threaded throughout the literature. That and transformational leadership are probably the most cited styles of leadership across the business literature. And they have overlapping features. Some are sharing a vision, being authentic, establishing trust, and providing a supportive environment. So, as far as transformational leadership goes, in addition to those overlapping features with authentic leadership, we know that it's important um, for magnet status. We know that it's important for reimbursement. We know it's important for challenging current processes or the status quo. We know that it's important for enabling others to act. We know that transformational leadership characteristics are really important for encouraging people's emotions, to make good decisions, to work hard, to be the best that they can be, to provide the best care that they can, to advocate for different policies and procedures and clinical outcomes. We know that we have to also, as leaders, we also know that we need to use transformational leadership characteristics not only to inspire motivation for personal growth, we also need to do this to provide intellectual stimulation to those around us. So, next slide, please. So, all of those things that I just talked about directly relate to nursing and can also be applied across other business settings. But why is it important? Well, we talked about that too, but is it important enough to invest in PsyCap, either for ourselves or maybe for our staff? Well, before you answer that, I'd like to take a few minutes and do a little brief reflection exercise or exposure exercise to thinking about how we can work on our own PsyCap on the side and how that can be used to develop others. You can stay on this slide, by the way. So this is just, like I said, a self-reflection piece. So consider this a form of intellectual stimulation, as we had just talked about. A challenge, really, to your basic assumption about how you can handle or manage risks. It doesn't matter what setting or role you're in or what your responsibilities are. This can be applied to anyone. So usually when there's reflection pieces like this, people always ask you to start thinking about something that didn't go well for you or something that didn't fare well for you. But as we just learned in our resiliency slide and self-efficacy slides, positive situations can also cause a myriad of events that will build other parts of your psychological capacity. So we're going to use that as an example. So think about this. You're an amazing, well-recognized nurse. You've been a nurse for 12 years. You've won awards for excellent patient care. You're a team player. You've been nominated to, work on shared governance councils or ad hoc committees or spearhead some research in your institution. You are an expert at what you do. So, because of your clinical excellence or academic excellence, you're promoted. Yay! We all wanted a promotion, right? That's what we're working so hard for. What kind of feelings do you think came with that? Do you feel energized? Excited, maybe? Challenged? Do you welcome the upcoming stress that you're going to incur with a new promotion? How about a hit to your self efficacy? You've been a pillar of excellence in your respective setting, and now you're asked to take on a managerial role, and you have limited experience with budgeting and creating ROI templates and writing strategic vision plans for your organization. This is all new territory for you. It can be a little frightening. Nonetheless, you welcome this challenge. This is exciting, right? You begin to kind of develop your own way, just like we do as we're baby nurses, right? We develop our own way. So you get into a role, you're learning everything, you feel like you're doing a great job, you're getting compliments, you feel good. And then something happens. Take the pandemic, for instance. Completely unprecedented. Nobody's prepared for that. Our organizations weren't prepared for this. Everyone is crumbling. Morale is low. Stress is at an all-time high. Everyone is looking to you, the leader. You're struggling too. But the problem when you're in leadership is everyone's needs need to become before your own. So you can't crumble too. You have to you have to stay strong. You can share some of these stressors and these concerns with morale and stress. You do need to stay solid. So how do you do this? How do you do this? Well, think about those other forms of capital we talked about. Your social capital. Think about this. Is there anyone during this time that you can tap into? Any old networks, friends, anyone who's been through crises or failures of business of unprecedented caliber? Can you leverage some of their experiences or observations or forethoughts? Can you access any of that? How about your human capital? Can you think back to your 12 plus years as a clinical nurse or academic where you've encountered an issue that was crushing, but you were able to pick up the pieces and build it back? Is there anything there that you can use? Any old education knowledge from old business courses or anything to create new frameworks to help manage this stress? Can you tap into human resources? What in your environment can you leverage to help you navigate this? There's a lot to think about, and every organization will prompt you with different items to leverage. But ultimately, you need to tap into your optimism as well. Think back to those rose-colored glasses I had on the slide. Well, you don't need to have that rosy of a picture. You do need to tap into a piece of this to really help you assess the real risk and the real impact that the situation is having. How can small pieces of optimism yield positive results around you? And while they won't be catastrophic, or maybe not even that noticeable for a long time to come, they are making an impact. So you need to continue to achieve and continue to access this optimism and display it for a while. And during this time, you need to be engaging in self reflection. And you also need to be thinking about your self awareness and if there's an opportunity for self development here. Again, unprecedented times. No one's prepared for this. Is there anything that can help us leverage something? Is there anything in the literature years ago? I mean, what can we do? So, kind of always that constant reflection. And I think a lot of us do this, but the problem is, I think sometimes we come to a halt. This we try to be optimistic, we try to draw on self-reflection, but if we don't see immediate results, I think sometimes we get depleted and we stop, and we almost feel like we failed, but we didn't. We need to keep working through that. It is a long haul. This is not something that changes overnight. It's like culture, right? You can't change it overnight, but rather you continuously go through those motions, you will see change. And then you will notice as you're doing that, as you're leveraging those other capitals, as you're exuding optimism, as you're practicing self-reflection and engaging in self-development, you're really working in tandem with those other robust resources. So you're building your self-efficacy. You're really continuing to bolster your optimism as well. So those two things are really helping build your resiliency, because going through that whole process, of course, we're going to develop resiliency. And of course, after we overcome this, we're going to have a very robust launching pad to tackle future challenges ahead. So once we kind of figure out how to do that, and we have a very solid understanding of our foundation, we can teach these or display these characteristics and resources to others around us and help them develop their own psychological resources. Because literature shows that leaders who display psychological capital also subsequently develop psychological capital in others. So it's very important. So that's just one small example of how to build resiliency and how it works off of those other pieces. Another good example I like to share is the one of hope. And if you remember, hope was built off willpower and way power. So really, how are we creating our goals, right? We all have a goal. It might be really broad, it could be super specific, but nonetheless, we all have one. We all make them. Some are targeted. Some use a very specific framework. I know for me personally, I use the SMART framework, which is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So that's how I make my goals. But often I noticed when I make my goals, because I have to make them all the time for work and just personal goals at home, I never include a sub goal. And I'll talk more about that in a second. And I noticed when other people make goals, and again, I've made these ones too, um, sometimes I use a negative approach or an avoidance framework. And let me give you an example of what that is. I do this one frequently every year. I'm going to cut out sugar and lose 10 pounds. Okay, that's great. So I'm making a goal based off an avoidance framework. I'm avoiding sugar. Well, the problem with that is it's very difficult to measure sustainability and success or small wins when you have a very broad goal like that, especially with a negative approach. Likewise, even if you have a more targeted goal, if you don't have a subscale, you're not going to be able to achieve success. And I'm going to dive into that here in 1 second. The Mind Garden is a company based out of San Francisco, San Diego, somewhere over there. But they are a company that holds training guides, tools and resources from lots of leadership and positive psychology literature. And as I'm working through, I'm almost completing my dissertation work as psychological capital as a factor for leadership development. I've been able to familiarize myself with the PCQ manual, the Psychological Capital Questionnaire manual for developing psychological capital. And interestingly, the one thing that has stood out to me the most is people really struggle with the goal thing. So that's why I thought I would bring this up here. It's a good time to add some self-reflection on that as well. So we talked about that negative or avoidance framework, and now I'm going to talk about a sub-goal. So here's the example posed in that manual that I think is great. Smoking. Assume that your goal is to quit smoking. How will you know when you met your goal? Did you meet your goal after you stopped smoking for 3 days? 5 days? 2 weeks? A month? A year? Was that your goal? Did you meet it? There's no end point, right? And more importantly, there's no middle point, which is the sub goals. Okay. A sub goal would look something like I'm going to reduce my cigarettes from 5 cigarettes a day to 3 cigarettes a day by 2 weeks. Okay. That's just one piece of a goal. That goal being that specific and that small optimizes your chance for a successful way power, meeting that pathway, meeting your goal. It also allows you to celebrate small wins, right? Because let's face it, if you have a goal with no sub goal or a negative framework, I'm going to lose 10 pounds by cutting out sugar. I don't know about any of you, but that has never happened for me. So again, I need to constantly think about resetting my goals and including those subscales in there. Importantly, too, when you have those subscales in there, when you get to your small win and you look at your next set of subscale, which might be, I'm going to reduce my cigarettes from 3 to 1 in 3 weeks. Well, maybe you look at that goal and you stop and self-reflect for a moment and you're like, you know what? We're in the middle of a pandemic. I don't have a babysitter. My kids are in online virtual school. My work pile is almost unmanageable. And I don't know that this is a realistic expectation at this point. So now you're faced with a little bit of a dilemma, right? So do you reestablish your goal or do you make a new pathway? Here is what we're calling a goal inventory. And I would encourage you all, and you can teach your staff this too, or whomever, your peers, your colleagues, you can use it yourself. Make another sub goal. If that's not realistic because of the environment around you and the barriers and obstacles, then either elicit help from someone else or create another sub goal within that to make it more achievable. Maybe you'll say, I will maintain 3 cigarettes for 3 more weeks until, I complete this manuscript or whatever it is. And while it's extending it to a sense, that's okay because you're not failing. You're just extending your route to success. Okay, so that's what we call goal inventory. It's very important to do that when you're making goals. And I myself need to continue to work on that. So, and just like the leadership literature, the small wins are super important to celebrate for yourself. It will give you a boost in your efficacy, and it will inspire upwards hope, and it will drive you to work harder to get to your end point. So that's just one, again, one example of how hope and self-efficacy and optimism, you can kind of see how these little self-development exercises boost all components of your psychological capital, which in turn, again, you can use once you're building this up, you can use in your own work environment, or you can use it in the home setting. There's many, many benefits. Next slide, please. So the now what? So now you have a very introductory overview to what psychological capital is. We have a summary of why it's important, and I'll just recap some of those here. Employees with higher levels of PsyCap obviously display more positive attitudes. They yield a higher self-report of job satisfaction. They have less intentions to leave. They have more productive work behaviors. They also experience lower levels of burnout, lower levels of psychological distress, which again is super critical right now, and moving forward as well. And they have better adaptive coping skills, which helps them overcome workplace stressors, which again can, if the stress gets the best of you, we can see that our behaviors and our attitudes will decline. So if we have better adaptive mechanisms to stress, we'll be able to maintain a more positive, higher performing work performance in our place of employment. Even more so, higher psychological capital for nurses specifically enables us to move beyond the status quo and advocate and influence workplace stakeholders to create safer, higher quality, evidence-based professional standards based off of our view of optimism. Remember, we want what's best for now and in the future. And to do that, we need to have advocacy skills, but that comes from optimism. And again, and critically important too, is PsyCap is considered a component of authentic leadership development, which we did talk about. And when PsyCap is developed through positive and supportive organizational environments, through either employees, staff, or even on the macro level, those on the receiving end are able to better enhance their view of self-actualization, self-reflection, and self-development. And quite frankly, we need to be building nurse leaders for the future, right? So if they have an overwhelming sense of self-development based off of, our enhancement of their internal resources, this could be critical for organizational success, right? We're going to need more leaders. The nursing shortage is not getting better anywhere across any of the settings. So we need to pay close attention to that. And of course, we need more research on nursing and psychological capital. There's over 20 years of research in organizational and management and psychology literature, but it's really just in its infancy in nursing, it's interesting. And I think we all need to work together, our academic and clinical partners, and really investigate how this affects our nurses and what we can do to improve it, and if we have the organizational resources to make this part of our trainings, our everyday trainings in the workplace. So it has a lot of benefits. And as you can see through those little self-development exercises, we can do some of these on our own, and you can do them as well with your staff or others. But we still need to advocate for perhaps a more formalized intervention or initiative to help our staff with build these resources. So with that, I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for sharing with us. This has been great, and I know I took some notes personally, especially in regards to the different aspects that you talked about with hope and things of that nature. We do invite any questions. Please utilize the questions feature if you do have questions. We do have a question here from a participant, and it reads, she's not sure if we're touching on this, but how can we break the mental tie between work and home? I'll be watching TV at home, but rather thinking of all the tasks I have to do at work the next day.
What a fantastic question. I think we all do that. And again, that's another area that we could spend a little more time researching in terms of psychological capital specifically. But I think one thing that I noted in my review of the literatures and things like that is psychological capital really enhances well-being. And when you have a sense of well-being, you also have it encompasses that work-life balance piece, right? So if if we get to a point where we're developing our internal resources, we can set boundaries for ourselves, right? That's part of that hope. We can make a goal that that's a boundary, right? We need to do better work-life balance, and we need to be clear about how we're going to get there. And again, thinking about that optimism piece, like you need to think about how you want things to be now and in the future. And if we're sitting at home watching TV, and I do it too, my emails are going off or my phone's beeping, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want to get this done so tomorrow's a lighter day. We have to be living presently, right? You have to really stop and think. There's that self-reflection piece, right? Is this something that can wait? What do I need to do this right now? Is this going to change anything? If it's not earth shattering, then it can wait. So again, kind of drawing in on those other aspects to navigate that. But great question, and I think that's another area that we have found even in the lit searches that psychological capital specifically with work-life balance is still in its infancy. But here's some general suggestions for that.
Thank you for answering that, Ashley. And I have to say, personally, I try to remember that, even if it's just with myself, I deserve to be present. And so if I'm spending time with other people, they're in my life for a reason. So I should be present with them and they deserve that time. So I put work and things like that aside, but it's definitely easier said than done. We have a lot of comments coming in about how great your presentation was and how everyone really enjoyed it. Ashley, is there a
Thank you.
way that you would allow people to connect with you outside of this webinar? Do you feel
Yes.
comfortable with that?
Yeah, I can put my email in the chat if I'm doing this right. I work online. You would think that I would be better with this kind of stuff, but I'm not.
I know it's difficult
So
because
I,
everything is so different.
all right, I
So
think I posted it, but I think it just went to the panel. Oh, I think I went to you. Did everyone get it? I put it in the chat.
I can definitely make sure everybody gets it. So if you do have questions for Ashley, please feel free to reach out to her because I know some individuals wanted to discuss with you about, it's such a dynamic conversation to be had. And since you had a lot of dialogue and not a lot on the slides, I know that there are a few that would like to definitely be in touch.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yes, of course.
and then, yeah, one person asked, can we get the slides? Are you willing to share your slides?
Yes, I can absolutely share the slides.
Okay, perfect. And in addition to that, when the presentation is loaded to the Sigma repository, all participants will have access to the slides, but if anybody wants to reach out to you directly for the slides before that, please feel free to use her email. The presentation will be available via the Sigma repository within a few business days of the recording today. Any other questions? We have lots of thank yous. This was lovely.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
so
I can't see anything because I don't know how to work this machine, but thank you all. I'm so glad I'm so glad you got to join my webinar. I hope you were able to take away some valuable food for thought. It's a great topic and it's very, very important, especially now.
So, Ashley, I do have a question in regards to this being, a novel and innovative topic, as one of our participants explained it. Are you going to, what's your publishing look like? Are you going to publish your study?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes, there's some different ones in the pipeline here. So, like I said, I'm working on my last piece of dissertation. So, some other stuff, a couple manuscripts will be popped out of that as well. And I'm looking to do also a psychological capital micro intervention in my workplace as well. So yeah, there's lots of fun stuff coming up. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be hearing from you in the future, it sounds like.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Ashley, for sharing this great information with us. Sigma is grateful that you took the time to share with the audience, and we look forward to hearing more about this and whatever else you take a deeper dive into in the future. We hope that you enjoyed our webinar. As a reminder, 1 week from today, you will be emailed a link to the evaluation for you to obtain your Nursing Continuing Professional Development Certificate. Be sure to check out Sigma's upcoming webinars, podcasts, and resources to support you and your colleagues at sigmanursing.org. As previously mentioned, previously recorded webinars and podcasts are freely available on the Sigma repository. Thank you for joining us today and have a wonderful day.